I am the famous American. I have a question for you. I assume that you're in a different country other than the United States, and I'm asking you for your opinion, your view on this. Is the United States perceived as the villain? I recently watched Turning Point, the documentary series on Netflix, talking about how the United States reacted on 9/11 and the 20 years later of war and all the aftermath of that. And some things could be justified that we did as a nation, as a military, as a government. But a lot of things are horrible that took place in the attempt to make things right. It's easy to understand when you watch that documentary, when you watch that series, how it could be perceived that we were the bad guys, that we were the terrorists even. I remember watching even on Anthony Bourdain's Parts Unknown. He had an episode where he goes to North Vietnam and he talks to the people there who basically were saying, yeah, we were being invaded by the United States. That was called the American War. You know, granted, those people, and that's how it is often in war territories where we go to fight the war. Those people don't even necessarily want to fight us, but their government's making them. It's either fight for that government or be put in a camp or killed. So it's not like they care either way. But it's interesting that in the attempt to save the world, to create peace, to prevent terrorists from attacking again, that we would be involved in 20 years in a war and a lot of civilian casualties and even breaking the law to have prisoners in Guantanamo Bay. All of those things that, again, if you haven't checked out the documentary on Netflix called Turning Point, that's what's inspired these thoughts. But I just remember in college, shortly after 9/11 happened, I was in Thailand and I was working with this actually a team of Canadian people too. And I remember him turning to me and he said, so what are they telling you guys over there? And I said, I don't know what you mean. He's like, on the news, do they make you think that you're actually doing a good thing by attacking other countries and occupying them because of what happened on 9/11? And I couldn't process what he said back then. 20 years later, I understand it better. But this question I'm asking, I can't answer it myself because I'm an American. I have to ask the outside world, what's the perception of the United States at this point? Are we perceived as some sort of villain? And I think the Marvel movies, the Avengers movies, tackle this concept themselves. That in the attempt to be the good guy and to also defend yourself, you ultimately, if you have power and control and money, you ultimately become a lot like the villain, a lot like the terrorist, the enemy. And a cliche in a lot of movies is where they have the villain and the hero talking and the villain says to the hero, you know, you and I, we're not that much different. We actually have a lot in common. And that's something that's said. But it makes me wonder if that's how we're perceived. Are we perceived as a villain, as a hero, or basically just in between like a lot of countries? Morally, ultimately, when it comes down to in the scale, are we at best morally neutral? Are we the villains? Are we the heroes? How are we perceived? I'm asking the outside world for commentary. I want to be open-minded. I want to try to process this and imagine how can I think in a way that's not simply 100% patriotic, but instead the whole world. Because who am I to say that a human life is worth more in the United States than it is in Afghanistan? Who am I to say that? There were so many casualties involved. And ultimately, in our aftermath to try to help the Afghan people fight off the Soviets, we ultimately created terrorist groups by default, by leaving our weapons over there and leaving them in an unstable situation. It's a moral mess. There's no doubt about it. But when it's all said and done, 20 years later, specifically, is the United States perceived as a villain? Just like on Cobra Kai, on the show. That whole show, a very successful show on Netflix, is following this concept of what if the good guy ultimately was kind of like the bully? That's the concept of Cobra Kai. You take a movie from 1984, Daniel's supposed to be the guy getting picked on, and that's why he takes up karate. But in hindsight, maybe the bad guy was just kind of defending himself against the good guy being there. Your thoughts right here.